I'm sure that a regular thing, amongst a lot of fandoms and specific fans in general, there's always those characters that unfortunately like died or didn't make a return when they had a very strong potential to be able to do more and to live up to greater heights. And in Fairy Tail, there's a couple of characters that I'm like, man, do I wish that like these guys got more than more than they were presented with, because everyone's gonna have their own favorites, and sometimes sadly the ones that you end up liking aren't ones that last like a long time. You can obviously see the one for this video is Zancrow. Zancrow, I always really liked from just the go. I remember like when his character was first introduced into the series, obviously having black flames, like before I even knew anything about like God Slayers and stuff, that he just looked hype. He's got this sick, like, Super Saiyan 3 blonde style hair with this badass looking kind of like almost ritualistic tribal warrior outfit. It actually reminds me somewhat of Ignia's outfit as well. So also on top of that, Orga's. But, and then you also have his crazy laughter, the way that he just walks around. Zancrow is like a cool, his name is Zancrow. It's a cool ass name. But Zancrow is a character that is amongst many, like I said. If I could swap a character to maybe be like a little bit more important, like Zancrow is one of them. I'd say like the only other characters that like, man, do I wish I could have made like last longer in the series are people like Mard Gear or God Serena, stuff like that. And funny enough, Zancrow actually, I always had ideas, like the idea of like what he could have done, which I'll get to in a little bit in the video. But Zancrow, he had like this really cool position in the series that there's been a couple other characters had the opportunity to to fill in a role of being like Natsu's enemy rival. And really, when you think about like first we had Gajil, but Gajil wasn't evil; he was more of an antagonist, a bad guy. But from when we saw stuff about him later, finding out stuff about his backstory, if you've read the Road Knight spinoff, that he was more just like he grew up in a very bad environment and a bad mindset. Like a lot of the ways that Jose kind of like saw his guild and saw aspects about being a guild, having to be the number one, being the top, and crushing any competition kind of thing. And then like later when we saw him, just kind of like slowly getting into Fairy Tail, that he was a good guy at heart. We even see a little bit in his spinoff that one of the reasons that he goes along with this whole like quest for power and whatnot is because of the fact that he grew up in a place where the strongest essentially was in charge, and Joseph being stronger than Gajil, and kind of going with that mentality, it always made a lot of sense to me. But after that, you get people like Cobra, which I like Cobra, but I don't think Cobra could fit in the role. Like, some of the, probably the least fitting in there, unless, like, I'm going to count Agil to maybe a degree. The only person that, if you counted him, would be, would be someone with less kind of presence as, like, a rival to Natsu. Because, like, Cobra, and then if you count Agil, it was more of just that kind of fighting, want to, to battle and, being on an enemy side. And then with Cobra, you also get the fact that, he's a Dragon Slayer, but I mean, he's a second gen, obviously not the same. But that's mostly it for them. And you get people like, you had Sting and Rogue. I mean, Sting and Rogue for Gajil and Natsu. It was similar to like how Gajil was for Natsu. Like, they weren't evil. They just were, in a really bad environment, and it messed, well, at least with Sting, it messed with his way of thought, his personality and stuff. And Jackal, like always had a little bit of that spot, but not the same as I would say Zancrow. Like the character that holds like the most potential to really sit in that position of kind of like also vibing with the main character, while also fitting in that kind of powerful enemy rival role, would be Ignia. But outside of that, Zancrow. Like Zancrow was really cool just from the fact that he had like obviously the black flames. I mean, that's just one of those really cool ways to have an element like just in general that just looks badass and like from the drop of the hat, black flames, and on top of that you get the title God Slayer stacked onto it. Regardless of like how unfortunate it is to usually be a God Slayer in Fairy Tail, you either die, lose your magic, or you end up like Oregon with practically zero backstory and zero relevance, even in the arc where you were like one of the main antagonists. But Zancrow, like, he just had this interesting way of conducting himself. He was always extremely high energy. He understood like who was what strong and who was weak in comparison. But at the same time, unlike Natsu, like we saw, in the currents of people of his guild, like when he says like you guys aren't strong enough to beat Natsu, I'll do it. You guys go fight, somewhere else. Go find Zareth, and he was fine with that. Like he acknowledged that Natsu was stronger than these guys, but the second they acknowledged that Natsu was strong, like hey, Zancrow got pissed. Like he got very upset. Like he was not having that at all. Anybody, giving the idea of strength and toughness to a guild outside of Grumble Heart clearly messed with him. And it was kind of like one of those things where Natsu doesn't really take slander towards the guild at all, and he can, switch from being pretty nice and friendly to being pretty tame to absolutely, vein popping at how furious he's ready to throw hands immediately. And Zancrow had that to a really strong degree. And on top of that, when we saw him interacting with some of the other Seven Kin of Purgatory, which I wish we got more of, is he had like a much nicer nature towards them. Whereas, similar to like how Natsu is to people with the guild, for the most part, not when they're getting in, a fairy tale-esque brawl. Not a serious fight, but still a fight. But you know what I mean? But Zancrow, he always just carried this level of just kind of cool presence, even in the short amount of chapters he had, because he wasn't supposed to be that big of an opponent, but at the same time, he's one of those ones that just had such a cool vibe to him that I really wish he, was a bigger character. When you compare him to the other kin, like he's like smack dab in the middle of the Seven Kin. You have people below him, people like Kane Hikaru, Meridi, and I would say Zoldio. And then people above him for sure, you got Ultir, you have Azuma, and I fully believe Rusty Rose just because how broken Rusty Rose's magic was. And even amongst that, when you have the final boss of that arc being Hades, and then like a surprise extra boss with Blue Note, Zancrow never really had like a full all-out kind of value in the series. Like he didn't have like a big role outside of fighting Natsu, introducing Godslayer stuff. And really, when you look at it, his biggest contribution to the series, I see in a lot of ways, was having the introduction of Slayers being able to adapt to variations of their attribute. But it's always funny to me because a lot of people would look at that, and I remember at the time people were, you get the people who are either really upset or the people that are like, oh, that's really cool, like how they did this. You're not going to get the full all that explanation right from the start, but you can pick pieces and put them together and try and figure it out yourselves. But he didn't have like a arc in the story outside of that. He wasn't like someone like Meridi having the stuff with her backstory, obviously everything to do with Ultir and her plan to to time travel. Looking even like Blue Note had more with wanting to find Mavis's grave. Zancrow has like the same similar presence that you would have with Natsu. Like you put the Fairy Tail Guild on the battlefield, like Natsu doesn't have to have nearly like more of a personal idea going into things outside of enemy of the guild and whatnot, but he is still going to put in a lot of effort, and he still has like a really big kind of just general presence wherever he goes. And like I said, Zancrow wasn't the strongest of the Seven Kin, but I think that personality wise he was, if not the best out of them. Just from the way that he just interacted. Mishima gave him a lot of really cool character traits. Again, like the way he walks even in this panel. With that weird, like, bow-legged kind of creeping way that he moves about. And how he's got the head tilt as he's going. The psychotic eyes. And just, he in general gave this really cool showing that if it wasn't for like him having like the whole Godslayer aspect and being an opponent for Natsu, he wouldn't have really been that memorable, because even the people below him, you look at Meridi, like Meridi, showed back from the story, she still exists now, and she had a big role near the end with Alvarez. When you look at somebody like Kane Hikaru got a lot more, I think, general spotlight than Zancrow did, because Zancrow really only got like the 2.5 chapters to fight. Kane got more, and we kept like peeking in on him. Like Zancrow was really the first one we see fall out of the Seven Kin, which again, damn. But at the same time, it's just one of those things. Like not everyone's gonna win with characters they like. Sometimes you end up liking a character that's not meant to live the longer game. But Zancrow, to me, like I've always really just wondered what it would have been like if he didn't die. You have this crazy psychotic godslayer on the loose, and it'd be like after his guild is demolished and most of his people are killed, assuming like if he didn't end up running into into Zareth and then dying, then he would probably be on the ship at the very end of Sirius Island when Grimoire Heart was on their way out and Zareth showed up to kill Hades. And outside of Rusty Rose, like being added in the anime, we don't really know a whole lot about Kane Akaro, except at some point he met Abel and gave him, one of his Mr. Kersey voodoo dolls. But Zancrow, like, he had this, like, strong level of feeling that he could have just lasted longer and could have stuck around. There's even, like, a part where when he's talking to Natsu and, like, talking about their magics, Natsu brings up the fact that he was actually taught his magic by a dragon, whereas Zancrow learned it from a Hades. He didn't actually learn it from a god. He kind of just learned it from a book, I would assume, essentially similar to how Sharia got hers. But with all of that, he has this wording of, like, his reverence to Hades, of, like, seeing him as a god, and, like, he could have had such a larger long game kind of thing. Because it's say, like, he ended up living, he could have ended up being the guildmaster of Grimoire Heart after, Hades died and most of their big people kind of, went away. The 7-year time skip, you could have easily just had him stay on the boat. I doubt Zareth would really give him much attention after he dealt with Hades. It would probably just be like, at one point Zareth leaves and the members of Grimoire Heart that are left, Zancrow included, would have just gone about their merry way and tried to figure out what's next in life for them. The other idea that I always had is actually something that I, like, theorize, like, what, like, not like a theorize, more like a what if, and kind of like in a way that it would make sense. Is it, say, if he ended up becoming a, part of the legal guild, similar to like what Ravenhill was doing for a bit. Like, what if instead of Jienmo being the guildmaster of Sabretooth, you had Zancrow? And the other character that I always, like, had the idea, not like the thought of, like, who else could have fit that role, if it was, like, Laxus. But Laxus, it would have to have been kind of like how he was during the fighting festival arc, how he was just very enraged, very wanting to overcome his grandfather's power and shadow and, press himself out there. And it would make sense if he was going to do that too, because it'd be like, strength-wise, wanting to get a guild, like, at the very top, taking Fairytale's spot. But also would have made sense for Zancrow in a similar way. So Zancrow, like, it's weird because, like, I have a general good amount just of information to talk about him. Like, I like talking about him. And, like, even some of the stuff they had in the anime. Like, I love his creepy anime laugh. Go look at Zancrow's laugh and how the guy did it in, in the anime. Or, you could literally just Google up Fairy Tail Zancrow laugh on YouTube and you'll probably find a clip of it. But he just has this maniacal laugh. He really has like, the personality as well. Like I said, like, how he instantly turned on people on his guild as soon as what he saw as slander towards his guild presented itself. Natsu's the same way. Like, Natsu could be super chill one moment, but if you do something that draws his anger, like slander the Fairy Tail Guild, he'll instantly want to throw hands with you. So Zancrow, at the base root of it, always had, I would say, at least currently, not counting Ignia. Like, Ignia, I think, is going to end up overtaking most characters in the series when it comes to, like, the amount of importance that his backstory and us getting to know him and seeing him do stuff is really going to be, just because of his direct relation to the overall plot right now in the 100 Years Quest, as well as, connecting to Natsu and Ignil. But Zancrow, he was like when you see a superhero and there's like a villain version of them. You got like Flash and Reverse Flash, you have Bizarro, Superman. I mean, you can kind of throw a rock at a bunch of these guys and, you'll probably run into something where it's like their villain version is just them but bad. And Zancrow is like that with Natsu, and I always really liked that. Again, it's a shame. You can't have every character you like live. Sometimes you're going to get them, to stick around. Sometimes they're unfortunately going to get killed. Sadly for me, most of the ones that I really like end up getting killed. Look at, Zancrow, for example, looking at people like Zareth, looking at people like Wall. Like, Mishima has unfortunately, like, set these really cool characters for me to like, and then those are the ones he ends up killing. And at the same time, I'm pretty okay with it just because of how it progressed for the kind of like guys left over overall, like in total, because of the ones that did get spotlight, especially old tier. I think it was more valuable to the story itself, whereas doing more stuff with Zancrow would be like opening up an entirely new plot point that would have to get addressed and worked around. Because like I would assume if Zancrow wanted to build a guild to kind of like take Fairy Tail's spot and hold like a level of power and presence over Fiore in like more of a hostile manner that Fairy Tail had, then Zancrow or Laxus were always like the best picks for him. And like I said, Zancrow would have loved it. I would have loved to see adult Zancrow, probably like a good couple inches taller, more jacked. His hair probably like all the way down to his calves, just looking like an absolute psycho. And then seeing what more of what God Slaying magic could do. And it would have been really cool if like Mishima went with that and we ended up getting a rematch of Natsu versus Zancrow, maybe after Natsu gets Lightning Flame Dragon mode, at the regular with Second Origin, or even later, maybe near the end, or maybe he could have been in Tartaros. There were so many options that he could have been brought into, given the idea of him being alive. Like, imagine if he didn't die, and then, like, the remaining members of Grimoire Heart, you had Tartarus people swoop in, take them to Health Score, and make them demon-like. If you had Zancrow with demon abilities, devil powers, and, like, whatever crazy curse they could give to him in order to just screw over his opponent. So it's really weird because, like, Zancrow, there's not a lot really to talk about him. Like, he doesn't have much of a backstory at all. Outside of the couple of chapters where we get him fighting Natsu, you don't get much of him. It's like some of the shots coming into Sirius Island when he ends up, like, roasting the people in his guild for thinking of Natsu as a strong and powerful guy, or just Fairy Tail in general. He just had this extra kind of layer to him that I always really liked. Like, Zancrow just had this badass kind of outright, you don't even need to know what this character can do. You don't need to know what his story is or where he's going to go in this arc. He's one of those characters you just see and you instantly think, like, this guy must be cool. He must be a badass. And he was to a degree. Unfortunately, he ran into somebody that he should have been way more cautious around. But like I said, like, Zancrow, he is somebody that I can just put information out there, just have a full conversation with somebody about him off the little stuff we had. Because like I said, there's a couple panels, before his fight with Natsu, a couple chapters back, where he's talking to, like, people on the top part of the ship where Hades is sitting. You have the Seven Kin and whatnot. And he's, like, seeming a little bit more silly, like when Kane Hikaru talks really fast and Zancrow thinks he can't understand him. You have stuff like when Merity upset Ultir by calling her Urtir, obviously referring to stuff with her mom. And when Merity got sad, Zancrow kind of like had essentially like this almost like consoling nature to him, similar to how Natsu, can be with Wendy. And it actually would have been really cool if he got more of that kind of threat level. And I never really thought too much about it, but like this idea of if instead of Juvia, the one that fight Merity was Wendy, and just to give her kind of her own enemy. But other than that, like, Zancrow, again, doesn't have a lot of just general content to talk about. He's got a lot of cool spells. Like I mentioned, I really liked his design, both personality and his physical design, his magic and whatnot. He's just a character that's really cool in a lot of his own rights, but unfortunately those rights are kind of set with what Mishima gave him, because he unfortunately didn't plan for a character to stick around and kind of like go beyond where he was at, either in a road of being like way stronger in what he was already doing, or in like a road of like turning his life around, maybe becoming a good guy. Like, if he was in the Grand Magic Games, he lived, and like the whole idea of him forming Sabretooth, that it would just have been him faking being, on straight edge and stuff, and he would just be plotting for something, something evil, just to either carry on stuff from Hades or to wait until Fairy Tail arrives. Because, I'd still be fine with it in the idea if he did all that in, like, the short preparation it would take for Fairy Tail to get to the Grand Magic Games, but I wouldn't put him past him to kind of, like, have that mindset of just, like, being ready to screw someone over. He seems to take general joy in upsetting people and causing them, anguish and whatnot. But anyway, other than that, though, comment below. Tell me your thoughts about this. Like, it's going to be way longer than I thought. I thought this was going to be like a 12-minute video. It has to be like 20 plus or something. But Zancrow, as I said, he's one of those ones that it's not like we're going to kind of just look at outright panels. Like, I'm going to put a bunch of stuff in his spells and some of his moves and some of the scenes I was referencing in the editing for the video. But, man, like,